deadly terrorist acts.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas.
None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
This is Houston, say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Welcome to the Hagmann Daily Show, weekdays 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And now your hosts, Joe Hagmann and Jon Robberson.
Hello and welcome to this Tuesday, April 17th, 2018 edition of the Hagmann Daily Show. So glad to be here today. We got a lot to get into, and we have Jon back with us. Not only is he back on the show, he is back in the Hagmann Report City, Erie, Pennsylvania. So it's great to have you back, Jon. And you missed a good show yesterday. We talked about a lot of things going on, from the raid of Trump's lawyer and the demonization of Michael Cohen, and we have some developing news on that as far as Sean Hannity being named as a client of Michael Cohen, but Hannity denies ever paying him a retainer, ever asking him to conduct any legal services whatsoever for money. And this is, for some reason, we see people calling for Sean Hannity to be fired. It's a weird situation, but we're going to talk about that, as well as what we have seen out of Syria. And we have some stuff up on Hagmann Report from the UN, as Nikki Haley has threatened that the U.S. troops will not leave Syria until we've accomplished 3 goals, and we'll talk about what those are. But the White House, after those statements, backed away from Nikki Haley's pledge, also on new sanctions against Russia and on the what was going to happen in Syria. So what is the truth there? Now, there's a lot of other interesting things going on. Jon, I know we talked here before the show, but we didn't really get into any news in current events. What is it that's on your radar that you would like to get into first today?
Well, I'm gonna borrow this from a friend of the Hagmann Report, Alicia Powell, who I got a text from earlier today, and it simply said, "I'm fed up. Are we ever going to get to enjoy President Trump being our president?" And I texted back to her, probably not. And that's where we are today. This president remains under, it's not even a day-by-day or news cycle by news cycle attack. He's under a constant 24/7 barrage. And not to detract from Donald Trump's capability as an executive, as a chief executive, but he's a human being too. I mean, at what point, Joe, do we reach that strange tipping point where he's being distracted and spending more time in, defense and preservation of his presidency, as opposed to moving us forward vis-a-vis draining the swamp?
Yeah, and I don't know that we'll ever actually see that time when, the media and all these other people from the political world and otherwise stop attacking him. I don't think we're going to ever see that as long as he's president, because these people, the satanic elite, the deep state, as people call them, hate not only him, but what he represents and the people who support him. And that's a war that's never going to end until one side has wiped out the other, unfortunately. And it is something that, we talk about a lot. It's a spiritual battle at the root of this, and we are in some turbulent times. Absolutely. Real quick, Jon, I want to mention this because this was an interesting story last night, as there were reports of Syria intercepting and shooting down missiles that were shot by Israeli aircraft. And there were reports on the show last night, we mentioned them, that said that Israel was launching airstrikes in Iranian and territories in Syria. Well, there's new information about this that says something different happened. Israel and United States cyber attack on Syria defense system last night resulted in Syrian missiles being fired. Last night, Syrian state media widely reported that they intercepted and shot down many missiles from attacking Israeli aircraft. But this morning, there was new reports by Russian and Syrian officials saying that Israel and the U.S. conducted an electronic communications attack on Syrian systems, making them believe they were under attack and launching multiple air defense missiles. And there are reports of this, one on Yahoo. Syria says false alarm set off its air defenses. Another one from Sputnik News, false alarm set off Syria air defenses overnight. So was this a cyber attack conducted by the United States to fool the Syrian missile defense systems into thinking that missiles were being launched into the region? That's a very interesting story.
It is indeed. And I think that we can use that to segue into what has been, at least in the new media the last 3 or 4 days, the perceived response from the Putin, I don't want to say Putin regime, but from Russia. And that is the notion. So let's kind of suss this out a little bit, just geopolitically. In spending time with my mom over the past week in Washington, sometimes it's interesting when you talk to somebody who's not a total news junkie, because they sometimes can see things with a little more perspective. And I said, something to the effect of, my goodness, we're on the precipice of World War III. What am I doing up here in the middle of nowhere on the Canadian border getting my teeth fixed? And she laughed and said, well, what's Putin going to do? Blast the United States, France, and the UK? And I thought that was an excellent point, because I think what happened here, as far as a game of brinksmanship, Joe, if you will, is by buddying up to an odious character like Macron, and I think Theresa May's equally odious. I don't like her either. But by doing so, it sort of boxed some of Putin's options in, because realistically, he can't start sinking warships that are French, British, and American. That's biting off a pretty big mouthful. But what he can do is employ all of the tools in the Russian intel arsenal by way of cyber attacks. And the other thing I'd like to mention quickly about this is, I think that there may be some veracity to some of the reports we've seen out of Syria over the past 5-6 days. I think they are successfully using some of their anti-missile capabilities. Now, I read a detailed report on Saturday about Syria's at least on book missile defense capabilities, what you might call their white paper documented capabilities. Most of their stuff dates back to the late 60s and early 70s. However, they have purchased from Russia, and I believe they've made some purchases from Iran as well, of some of the more modern systems. And I'm no weapons expert, Joe, but if I understand missile technology correctly, it's a game of cat and mouse. As soon as the country on defense has a anti-missile system that can shoot down the offensive capability of the other country, then that country will make the missile more maneuverable or faster, or sometimes they have things they can do like false heat signatures or chaff that can confuse the anti-missile. And so I think what we may be seeing here, I mean, the Tomahawk missile, Joe, has been in the U.S. arsenal for 30 years. We launched Tomahawks during the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Now, I'm sure they've upgraded some of the capabilities of that missile, but I would not be surprised if, of the purported 105 missiles, if Syrian anti-missile capability was able to take some of them down.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting to see the capabilities that we have in the cyber world, yet for some reason they talk about our own cyber defense as though we're as vulnerable as everybody else. And we have seen certain cyber attacks happen. There's that site, what's that, Norse something, I can't remember the site, but it tracks cyber attacks between nations, and the United States, Russia, and China are the three biggest cyber actors in the world. And I don't understand this stuff really at all. I'm kind of computer illiterate, John, as you were talking about before we started the show. But I wonder what other capabilities are able to be accomplished using these types of technology. I mean, and how far and how they've been used in the past as well, because who knows what could be done under the false pretenses. If you can get another country to launch missiles based on a cyber attack, that is an indicator that maybe things that we see or think we believe or things that we're told might be completely different from what the real truth of some of these situations are. And there was also speculation that 71 of the missiles we shot into Syria, 71 out of the 101, I believe it was, some outlets were reporting were shot down. At the same time, the Pentagon issued statements saying that every single missile launched hit its target. But what's really weird about this whole thing, and I want to get into this aspect of it, John, is there was no reports of anybody being killed.
That's suspicious. That is suspicious. There's the Bashar al-Assad regime would certainly place front and center with all of the PR muscle that they can muster, what we call collateral damage, which is just a euphemistic way of saying killing innocent civilians. And we haven't seen that. The other interesting thing, I was thinking about this yesterday, and I'll hand it back to you, but it's the concept we're talking about right now, of course, is asymmetric warfare. And we see, I think, Joe, so much more active attack in the asymmetric warfare battle space. And I think it floats right past many of us in the news cycles because we don't identify it as such. And this is what I mean. If Amazon or Facebook or GoDaddy or any of these turnkey platforms, most of whom are just, in the tank for the leftist reprobate agenda, but I digress. When they take a hit, when they go offline for a few hours, when they drop customers' orders, when they have massive security breaches and customers' data leaks out into cyberspace as a whole, we often discount those things as a bad IT day at work. Oh, I bet the IT people over at Amazon were, they had a rough Tuesday. But we often don't know if that was actually instigated by a nation state or a rogue element of a nation state. And then, of course, the other two very common weapons in the asymmetric warfare arsenal are weather modification, and I believe we saw that several years back in Pakistan after the Arab Spring with what was it, a quarter of the country, a fifth of the country flooded. We know that we've been able to utilize that stuff going back to the later days of World War II, and certainly we saw it publicly all through the Vietnam conflict. And then, of course, we've got the infrastructure component. Now, we haven't seen that, thankfully, in this country, although there's that one malingering story, Joe, that happened in Santa Clara, California, several years back, which was the obvious spec ops attack on that power station. And we read reports about how it was obviously it was reconnoitered with military precision. The shooters hit the exact pieces of equipment they needed to hit to create the first domino in a cascade effect that would effectively eliminate a portion of the Western grid. So when we look at a nation's infrastructure, when we look at their commerce, and when we look at the cyberspace as a whole, I think, Joe, that we are seeing Russia, U.S., North Korea, U.S., China, U.S., Iran, Israel. I think we see these nations fight a lot more than we realize. They're just doing it in a very iron fist in the velvet glove approach.
Yeah, and it is, what we see, back to the no deaths and the reports that the buildings were evacuated and there was a heads up. I want to read an email, John, that we got yesterday from a listener. It was a forward. We were CC'd on an email to another radio show host, and this person goes on to say the following: I think Trump did the false flag. Why not? And then he goes on to reference the person who he's listening to and what they were talking about on the show. But he says, when Mr. Trump announced he was sending missiles on the day of the fake chemical attacks, days before he did, that was wrong because Trump went out of his way of saying in the past, I would never tell my moves. So him announcing that he was doing so is out of character. Anyway, they asked that question to ask if this president has some way, if this is part of a larger plan to imprison the deep state. And I want to address that in a second.
Oh,
but
boy.
Other people are saying, other people are saying that after the bringing on of the war hawk John Bolton and after the raid on Trump's attorney, that he was backed into a corner and given a number of choices of things he could do. And he picked the least evil choice, if you will, and gave warnings and whatnot, basically saying, look, I have to act, I have to appear as though I'm acting strong, and but you gotta get these people out of these locations. But I don't know. I mean, let me say this about the deep state. I don't believe for a second, and I hope I'm wrong, there's not going to be a prosecution of the deep state. You're not going to see Gitmo filled up with domestic terrorists and enemies of America, as far as, the Hillary Clintons, the John Podestas, all the people that people think are going to go down. As much as I would love to see that happen, and also being a part of helping make it happen, the narrative that is out there right now, I just don't buy it, and it's unfortunate, but I just don't. These people are the manifestation of evil on earth, of Satan's agenda.
Well, Joe, there's an old saying in Hollywood, and I'm going to butcher there's an old saying in Hollywood, and I can't remember it, but I'll give you the basic idea. When you're on your way up and everybody's smiling at your backside, just keep in mind what they're going to be doing when you're on your way down. And Hollywood, by popularity, they say, hey, you're only as good as your last picture. And it's true. You are judged by your last project. You can be James Cameron or Quentin Tarantino, and if your last project's a big flop, you have a tough time getting your next thing greenlit. Anyway, the point is, the reason that I agree with your synopsis, which is very unpopular in the new media right now. I have so many friends, so do you, Joe, people we talk to, maybe not every day, but several times a week.
Right, and I'm not disparaging.
Completely disagree with this sentiment, but here's the deal. These people who we call the deep state have got all those smiling faces beneath them on the totem pole that lifted them up to where they are at today. I don't want to get too far in the weeds. I'm going to give it back to you, but let's remember this. The Goebbels, the Hitlers, the Goerings, all of these Nazi characters, they would have been nowhere were it not for the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. And that's what they forget about the deep state. It's not so you take out. It's kind of like taking out a narco trafficker, a Escobar type drug lord. So you take him out. Good for you. Mr. X, man number 2, comes right in and fills the void. And I know that's a terribly fatalist way of looking at our world today. But man, Joe, we've been around this campfire a long time, and I'm not smoking the hopium.
Yeah, I'm not either, John. And not to disparage anybody else's point of view on this, or not to put down, anybody who does believe that this is going to take place. I just urge people. It seems that there's this narrative out there that, and let me go on to read the rest of this email. And I'm not putting this emailer down in any way. I just disagree with the point of view.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear. We're offering an alternative point of view. This is a discourse in the open market of free ideas. That's all. So please, to the individual that emailed us, do not take this personally. We are now we are responding to your email, and please feel free to email us your response to our response, and then we're having a conversation.
And I'll explain why I think what I'm reading here is a little dangerous to think this way. But this goes. The emailer goes on to say. That think about this. Why would the deep state not do the chemical attack for real, or even something worse? They have done it in the past. World War III. This is what I'm thinking. Mr. Trump is doing this, playing their game, and surrounding the enemy or deep state. After the tariffs, the Chinese moved battleships. Now Syria, with all three, Russia, Chinese, USA merging, they're surrounding Iran. Boom. Deep state finished. Deep state is dug in Iran, just like North Korea and Syria. These people do everything underground. What I say is not written. It is just my opinion. So they go on to say that much. But
well, it's a well thought out opinion. Hold on a sec, buddy. It's a well thought out opinion. Okay, first of all, to the writer of that email, and I forgive me, I don't know the name on the email because I haven't actually seen the email. Who is it?
It's Todd.
Okay, well, so a tip of the hat to Todd, because he's applying one of the biggest things that we peddle here on the Hagmann Daily Show, which is critical thinking. So kudos for that. But here's the problem. Number one, nature abhors a vacuum, and these deep state players who we can point our finger at, be it the Queen Beatrix or George Soros ilk, again, they have subordinates, they have underlings, many of whom have been lapping up their mess for 30 or 40 years, and they can't wait. They're salivating to get into the driver's seat. That's number one. But number two, Joe, and I'm going to throw you a curveball here, and then I'm going to kick back and listen to you, watch you field it. But this is what I've been catching via email and DMs on Twitter lately, and I think this is very curious, and we've heard Alex Jones comment on this. I have not heard Doug Hagmann comment on it, but also with the caveat that I was in transit all day yesterday and therefore kind of incommunicado. The raid on Attorney Cohn's office, okay, and let's forget about the fire in Trump Tower for now because that's just a whole nother thing, but the raid on Attorney Cohn's office sets bad precedent. I think we all can agree on that. But what about this speculation, Joe, that perhaps some financial improprieties, even what you would consider financial improprieties that were not intentionally done in a criminal manner, were waved in front of the president's face by these deep state characters, and they said, okay, Mr. President, are you going to play ball? Or as my article speculated 2 weeks ago, is it going to be JFK time?
Well, no, that's a very real possibility, John, and I want to go back to this Todd's email just to finish this point. And what I say about what Todd is talking about is about the president surrounding the deep state, which he says is Iran, Syria, North Korea, Russia, and China. The reason I see this is so dangerous to think like this is because this is exactly what the PNAC, the neoconservative warmongering agenda, pushed for before 9/11. There was a list of countries, and these countries were all on the list. And I see this. I don't know if this is coming from this Q movement, but if you're targeting states like North Korea, Iran, and Russia as hubs for deep state, and that's the reason we need to overthrow their leaders and invade or launch wars against sovereign nations, you are now parroting the Nazi Prescott Bush, George Bush warmongering neoconservative agenda.
Yes, you are. Okay, so again, just responding to Todd's email, and I'm forgive me, Todd and Joe, because I'm playing catch up here a little bit. Is he implying, or maybe even directly stating, that the deep state is of no concern in places like New York City, D.C., Brussels, the Vatican, or Tel Aviv?
Well, like I said, what he wrote was, this is my thinking. Mr. Trump is playing their game and surrounding the enemy deep state. And then he goes on to say, they're surrounding Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Boom, deep state finished. Deep state is dug in Iran, just like North Korea and Syria. Okay,
you nailed it with the PNAC thing. Again, to reiterate for our listeners and for our own state of mind, Joe, to be mindful of this. General Wesley Clark, 2002, 16 years ago, he named the countries that were given to him by a subordinate. He was very, again, I've said this before, I was never a huge Wesley Clark fan. He always seemed like a lick your finger and stick it in the wind type guy. Is he a military man or a politician? He's over there running NATO. What is this guy doing? Is he going to run? Remember this one? Is he going to run for president in 2004? I mean, never a huge Wesley Clark fan. However, sometimes, Joe, I feel like when you can identify veracity coming from someone that you don't particularly care for, a lot of times you've got to pay attention to that. So Wesley Clark mapped out the countries that our friend Todd just enumerated in his email that are actually obstacles to the bringing to full fruition the deep state agenda vis-a-vis this new world order or a globalist government, currency, etc. So So it can't be both. It's got to be one or the other. And where we get into some really thick mud as Christians, as conservatives, is when we start to examine things like the Vatican's agenda, Christian Zionism, and the deep state components of our country and of our friends over in England and in Israel. So the deep state, in my opinion, Todd, my response to your email is this. The deep state is as you say, Joe, it is first and foremost a spiritual state of being a reprobate. Okay, it is a state of being disconnected from God, because in my opinion, the very cornerstone of the deep state agenda is to be your own little g God and preside over humanity in your great benevolence and amazing wisdom.
Yeah, and I don't like, I have not liked this whole notion that there's these huge, massive secret plans and everybody's working together with Trump to get rid of the deep state, the satanic elite. Because when you think about it, in reality, the satanic elite, the deep state, are so encompassed, entrenched, so deep in our society at all the top levels of power, from Hollywood to politics to finance to business.
Joe, the deep state is deep.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to think that one man, or even one man with a team of his closest allies, would be able to rid of this government and this nation of that is ludicrous. And the what needs to happen is there needs to be 50 to 100 million Americans willing to march and get on their feet and go show the leaders, the deep states, that they mean business. And I'm not talking about doing anything illegal. I'm talking about actions through peaceful and civil, not even disobedience, but we have to make it known that we will not tolerate this, because these people, they will operate as far as we let them. They will push the line as far as we allow them to. And we as a people have not held our responsibility to govern our government. And we have fallen under the disillusion that appeasing our conscience is better than having true freedom. And unless we all have a collective understanding of that, nothing is ever going to change for the better.
Exactly. Let me pose this question to Todd, and I hope that he sends us a follow-up email. I have a funny feeling he will. What is more dangerous to us today, the deep state components in Iran or in North Korea or in Russia, or the deep state components, as we discussed 2 months ago on the Hagmann Daily Show, that comprise the 8,200 member SES in this country, which runs the gamut from the head of the Environmental Protection Agency to the people running the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and even the people in the private sector who are the corporate mega titans of things like Bank of America and Chase and JP Morgan. And I'll even take it another step further. All of the criminal ne'er-do-wells that chipped in back in 2009, 2010, and they're heads of the insurance companies that wrote Obamacare. They basically crushed healthcare in our country. See, these, in my opinion, there's validity to what Todd says. Yes, there is. In fact, Joe, you got prior to my tenure at Hagmann Report, your dad and yourself had a guest on once who claimed to be part of what they called the Eagles, or the Golden Eagles. It was the top Masonic order in Tehran. I don't know if you remember the guest. He was a pretty interesting guy. He was on True News too. And so we know that the deep state exists in a place like ancient Persia, but I'm more concerned with the deep state here that's putting farmers in prison for keeping a cow pond on their property.
Well, yeah, it needs to be done. You can't do it from the top down. It needs to be done from the bottom up, meaning we need to do this at the most local and basic level and work our way up from city councils to sheriffs to mayors to state representatives to governors to U.S. representatives to Senate to then to the White House. It has to be done at a very local level. And one thing that we lack as Christians, as conservatives, for some reason, even though we really do have an advantage as far as, I believe, money, and also with our strong beliefs and values and ethics, we do have the drive, and we don't have the organization. We don't have the blueprint. We do, but we don't. We're not coordinated. We're not organized like the left is, and this has created a huge problem. And how do you create an organization? I mean, there are organizations out there that have tried to do this, or tried to get everybody on board. The last one we really saw was the Tea Party, which we saw really fizzle out. But that same Tea Party base was the reason that the President Trump was able to get into office. So, well, the Tea Party, and also as a subsidiary to it, or maybe an offshoot, the entire Ron Paul revolution. But go ahead, Joe. Yeah. So what we see is we need to advance this agenda of unifying each other to the best of our ability, so that we are able to affect change at the local levels and work our way up. It's going to be, as far as a long-term plan, this is it has to be a multi-generational plan. But if we want any chance of success in taking back our country in any meaningful way, we're going to have to do this as Americans. We can't rely on the president. Yes, it helps, and there's no better time than now to be able to do this when Donald Trump is in office. But will the American people be able to get their acts together, to get organized, and to do their part in order to make this change happen? That's the real question. All right, switching gears here. I want to go back, John, to what you said before we went back down this path, and that is about Trump's lawyer. There is some very interesting information that I'm not sure how many people have seen regarding the judge who is presiding over the Michael Cohen case. Well, how about this, John? The judge in Michael Cohen's case officiated the wedding of George Soros. Federal Judge Kimba Wood, who is overseeing the court case against Donald Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, officiated the 2013 wedding of George Soros, a billionaire supporter of liberal political causes, according to news reports at the time. The judge is currently weighing whether to have a neutral third party review the documents seized in FBI raids on the office, home, and hotel of Mr. Cohen, and it goes on from there. So how does this even – the judge, Kimba Wood, was the judge that oversaw George Soros's wedding.
Well, okay. Now, when George Soros back in 1967, or it may have been 68, married Jabba the Hutt, I believe that it was, in fact, Judge Kimbo who presided over. Now, this is just ridiculous. This is what this is the effervescence of the methane bubbles percolating on the top of the swamp, Joe. That's what's going on here. And, whereas I think that we do need to do an extensive review of the judiciary at this time, from the Ninth Circuit all the way east, we see just today, and we need to talk about this before we wrap today, Neil Gorsuch slapped our president today with a little bit of a setback. But before we get into that, we have set in the last 100 years extremely bad precedent in this country, and it's actually precedent law, whereby judges with zero compunction, they will throw out the wishes of the commander-in-chief, the chief executive, and they do so regularly, as we saw at the beginning of Trump's presidency with the immigration issues, and they continue today. But that being said, my concern here runs a little bit closer to the investigation, which is looking at the presidencies, Joe, of Ulysses S. Grant, to a lesser degree Abraham Lincoln, certainly Grover Cleveland, Rutherford B. Hayes. These are presidents, Richard Nixon, who maintained some level of attorney-client privilege and then wound up with constitutional crises on their hands. With Abe Lincoln, of course, it was the Civil War, the temporary abolishing of the writ of habeas corpus. Of course, moving forward in history, the Teapot Dome scandal, which was regarded as probably the biggest national scandal in history, up to Watergate, which of course now looks quaint compared to Russiagate. So what we have in the no-knock raid of Michael D. Cohen's office is a situation, Joe, where I'm afraid that we are setting a terrible precedent through the controlled conditioning of the masses here, that it is okay to sidestep or circumvent attorney-client privilege, particularly with the President of the United States. And I'm not trying to defend President Trump here, but this ties back in, Joe, to the massive question on the table. Did the FBI discover some, more than likely than not, either a financial impropriety or something procedural, like someone on the board of directors of one of the casinos or something that's not supposed to be there, someone whose gaming license isn't quite in order? There's all kinds of intricacies when you run an empire like Donald J. Trump, where, well, it kind of falls under the indicting a ham sandwich thing. And that's my primary concern, is that I cannot heretofore recall, even going back to the early 20th century, Teapot Dome scandal, the failed presidency of U.S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln. I can't remember a time where law enforcement did a no-knock on the President of the United States attorney.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever happened in history, and I don't think we're ever going to see it happen again. At least I hope not. But
or it could happen tomorrow.
Yeah, it could happen again tomorrow. But what you mentioned about the Supreme Court, and I want to say that after reviewing what was voted on and changed, I really don't object to what the Gorsuch and the Supreme Court justices, what they did here. Looking at this, it says the Supreme Court on Tuesday erected new bars to deport legal immigrants for crimes they've committed here in the U.S., saying that part of the law that set the level of criminal behavior deserving removal is too vague. Gorsuch, one of the first major breaks with fellow conservatives, joined the court's left-leaning justices in upending that part of immigration law. He said that if Congress wants to make legal immigrants deportable for lower-level felonies, they can write those offenses into law, but they can't use a vague catch-all definitions to cover any serious crimes they did not list. So all the Supreme Court justices did is tell the Congress that they need to be more more articulate in writing the offenses that they deem serious enough for deportation. It's not saying that they can't deport people who are here legally who have committed serious crimes. They're saying define exactly what crimes fall under that definition, and that's okay. They say the language is too broad. So I have no problem with that whatsoever. But
you just laid down some interesting breadcrumbs, Joe. Consider this. The American public for far too long has been neutralized when it comes to applying pressure to the legislators who are supposed to represent the people, particularly in the lower house, the House of Representatives. Sitting on our hands, tuning in the Hagmann Report, pop a frickin' bag of popcorn. That's not going to work any longer. Without direct involvement, and I mean involvement to the level of badgering these people to do their jobs, how much longer are we going to suffer congressional approval ratings in the single digits? We get excited when it gets up to a 15% approval rating. These are the people that we hired and pay to represent our interests. Joe, it was not that long ago that an individual could make an appointment to see their congressman in their local field office when they had a legitimate complaint, a legitimate grievance. And of course, that now, that seems sort of quaint, seems like fighting City Hall. My point is this, back to the breadcrumbs. We could see a backlash against the ineptitude and the lack of action by Congress that could result in and I hate to even say this, it could result in the blue wave this fall. Because right now, the Congress is controlled, for better or worse, by the GOP. And we know that midterms rarely, if ever, favor the sitting president, especially the first midterm after his election. And my concern is the low information, no information voter who cracks open, MSNBC one time a day or something like that, and they read, congressional approval ratings at 11%, 14%, et cetera. They see this embattled president that they're just going to kind of say, well, you know what? We've eaten enough chicken. Let's flip over to beef. And before you know it, we start seeing people with D's next to their name piling into Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and that's what he said. No longer gone are the days where people can just sit back and observe or just talk on the radio or talk to their neighbors. We really do have to get involved in a very meaningful way as we see the freedoms and everything that was handed down to us through our system of government. The Constitution is being eroded and taken away, and we see that there is nothing to stop these people when we look at how long they have, how short of a time they've been able to change so much in the wrong direction, and what little. I mean, they still have a long way to go, but it's not inconceivable to think in 20 more years of this kind of propaganda, deception, brainwashing, immorality, perversion being promoted all throughout our mainstream, that it's going to at some point turn the tide to that is the majority way of thinking. And from there we can see how Christians especially will be hunted down like dogs and killed in the street for their beliefs. Look how rabid these people are now. Let's take a look quickly at Backpage.com. We have a situation, and Liz Crokin did an excellent report on her YouTube channel that I watched day before yesterday. Joe, my understanding is Backpage.com providing abused women in an abusive situation, as well as underage, in some cases children, in over 900 locations, and according to Liz Crokin's reporting, in 93 countries. The AG Sessions Department of Justice clamps down, shuts down Backpage.com. I don't know if this is legit or not, but it flew around Twitter 2 days ago, an award given to Backpage.com by the James Comey FBI. Did you see that? Yeah, and the Women's March, and many of the politicians who have supported and ran, one in particular, McCaskill, I think, Claire McCaskill, a senator. She's a beauty, but go ahead. She's heavily invested in the women's march, and she had to kind of break that relationship a little bit, at least publicly, after they defended Backpage. Now, what's crazy about this Backpage thing is the two co-founders who were charged with 93 counts of human trafficking and prostitution and all these offenses worked undercover with the FBI and actually received an award from Robert Mueller.
Okay, so I stand corrected. It was not from James Comey, but his predecessor, Robert Mueller. This ties into the comment you made a moment ago, which is the general direction of our culture today. And what bothers me is this. When you look at the electoral map county by county, we live in a red country with these annoying metropolitan irritants peppered throughout the land. And what's happening is because so much of the formation of the public opinion is crafted and created in places like New York City, Hollywood, Wall Street, etc., they move the agenda of the country. I listened to an op-ed yesterday that just drove me bonkers. That it was regarding Jack Dorsey's tweets last week, the whole Medium.com thing, that California is 15 years ahead of the rest of the country and always has been. Joe, California, as a native Californian, I can tell you that California is a failed state, period. The libs love to carp about how, we're the 7th largest economy in the world. And if we're doing things so poorly, then how can we possibly be the 7th largest economy? And my answer to them is, well, when Governor Pete Wilson was running the show 30 years ago, we were the 5th largest economy in the world. And we had an education system that could even be charted globally. Now the education system in California is so poor with their communist indoctrination camps that it doesn't even chart when compared to other countries. It can't even get on the top 100. So my point is, we are allowing things like Robert Mueller's FBI to give an award to Backpage.com. We're allowing stuff like that to slip through the cracks. If there were a groundswell of vitriolic pushback to your local congressperson that went something like this: Dear do-nothing rhino congressperson, my name is John, and I vote. If you don't do something in our district about the Backpage.com type issues, you're out in the fall. But people don't do that, Joe, because we've been conditioned to believe, quote, you can't fight City Hall, end quote.
Yeah, well, that's just the thing. We need to fight City Hall. Not only that, we need to become City Hall. We need to put the people we trust and that are honorable, that are people of merit and of integrity. We need to put those people who are going to put the interests of the American people first in these positions, from the city council to the mayor's office and on and on and on. And too often we see these people, many, come in with good intentions and get corrupted. But once you change the nature, as it does not lean towards that corruption initially, and you can get rid of it, then you start putting those people of integrity in those positions. It will, and you have to obviously keep a close eye on it because it will come back around. But you need to rid the environment of corruption and of dirtiness. It's amazing to me what these people at the top levels of government, whether it's in the state government, city government, federal government, are able to get away with, from the insider trading to the kickbacks to the receiving money for lobbying to getting paid.
We had to pass it so we could see what's in it.
Yeah, I mean, passing a $700 billion or a $1.3 trillion bailout or omnibus spending bill, and every single member of the Senate is, getting millions of dollars in kickbacks from it. Every member of the House is getting millions of dollars of kickbacks from it, and on and on and on and on. That has to stop. I mean, and how can you stop that? When we talk about Donald Trump draining the swamp, this is what's so infuriating about this Q phenomenon movement, is they offer no solutions except they try to, through riddles, piece together what's going on behind the scenes. But the reality is we have no more time to sit back and trust that other people are
do brain puzzles. Yeah, that's right. The time for crosswords and word searches is over. Joe, we are as Christians, as remnant believers, we're commanded, we're exhorted, we're admonished to occupy until Christ returns, regardless of your eschatology, regardless of when you believe that occurs on the timeline. Occupy means occupy. Now, this weekend, we're going to be at the Occupy 2018 conference. My topic is going to be Satan Loves Censorship. And I'm going to show both sides of that. I'm going to show how badly censored morality is. The state of censorship of morality, of that which is decent and right in this country, is on life support, Joe. To quote our friend Greg Jackson, it is a code blue crisis. But I'm also going to show the promotion and the celebration of the Backpage.com type platforms as they cruise through social media and pick up awards from entities like, the top law enforcement agency in the country. Thanks, Mueller. I'm going to tell you something and hand it back to you. You go out to Travis County, Texas, which is where Austin's located. You get 5 miles out of the city of Austin. And I'll tell you what, those ranchers, those farmers, those truckers who go to the cowboy churches every Sunday, they don't give a rip about what anybody in Hollywood thinks. And yet, in many of their homes that very night, the TV gets turned on, the kids get planted in front of it, many families eat their dinner in front of it. And to go back to what Anton LaVey stated in the early 1970s, television is the new family altar. So what I'm trying to say is, we have a cultural conditioning happening in this country. It's like a wind blowing at our backs, and more people need to turn around and stick their chin in that wind. But guess what? That's scary, because you might run afoul of the IRS. You might get in a little bit of trouble. You might have some trouble at work. Right now, folks, you're listening to somebody who got fired from half the shows I landed my last 2 years in Hollywood because they did not want somebody like me around. This is not to self-aggrandize. It's just to say it's skin in the game time. If you're not willing to get a little bruised or get a little bloody, then you better get ready for a world run by the Zuckerbergs and the Dorseys, because, Joe, that's what you're going to get.
No, John, that's very well said, and it's absolutely right. And if you're more concerned about catching your favorite TV show or more concerned about being able to go to the beach this weekend or on your family vacation this year, then our priorities are all wrong. Pretty soon, at some point, those things are not going to be possible anyway. You're not going to be able to continue to do those things if we don't stop what is coming. Your kids are not going to have the opportunities to do those things, if any opportunities at all, if we don't stop what's coming. So if we don't get our priorities straight and put aside the thing, and I'm talking to myself and John and everybody the same, so I'm not putting anybody down.
That's right. Can I get an amen? Well, this Joe and I are just as guilty, but Joe, go ahead. You got it, bro.
If we don't put down and put aside our own interests and our own whatever it is, motivations and goals, and come together and at least organize and create a plan and a system as to how we can affect the most change and take our country back for the people, not for us or any of ideology, except that of freedom of religion and freedom of our Constitution as our forefathers left it for us. Because if we don't come together and accomplish this, there's not going to be a future left for us in this country. Or maybe anywhere in the world. I don't know how that looks.
And not to add insult to injury or to place undue burden on people who are just trying to work and pay the bills. But our country, if you've noticed on a global scene, is the last holdout. It's the last bastion that hasn't completely capitulated. I'm reading a book right now that takes place in Australia. And it's a geopolitical story about Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Islamic influence in Australia. Now, Tracy Beans did a great piece of President Donald Trump and the President of Australia in conversation, and that transcription came out a few weeks ago. And Australia wanted us to take these, quote, refugees, end quote, and President Trump was balking. He was saying, absolutely not. He said straight up, we don't want these people. And what's happening is these little pockets of Hollywood and New York, and to a lesser extent, places like Vegas, they have created a cultural tsunami. And then what we're doing is we're allowing these political and spiritual malcontents in the back door so that they can operate in their little parasitic political manner. And they start to get positions of power, Joe, in places like Minneapolis, St. Paul, in places like Flint and Detroit, Michigan, where pretty soon you've got 3 or 4 city council members. Then you get a mayor, and pretty soon you've got Sadiq Khan, and you can't even cut your meat with a knife anymore.
Yeah, how's that anti-knife campaign going, John? I'm glad you just said something, because since last week or since when I said I never followed up. I followed up for the first few days after that homeowner was charged with murder for defending himself in his own home, but I have not followed up since then, and you just reminded me to do that, and also to follow up to see how this movement against knives is going by Sadiq Khan. And that's something that I will look into, and we will talk about tomorrow when we return. Yesterday, John, while you were gone, I talked about at the beginning of the show, Art Bell passing away, and we played that call, one of the most famous calls the Coast to Coast has ever had, where this guy is crying and talking about basically aliens or demons. They're not who they say they are. They're going to deceive everybody. And then not only the call cuts off, but the whole radio studio that Art Bell is broadcasting from is completely shut down, and the generators had to kick back on. And it just the whole thing was pretty crazy, whether it was real or staged or whatever it was, who knows, but it was a moment in radio history. But if you missed that, go back and listen to the beginning of yesterday's show, because that is really something special. And Art Bell passing away, I just didn't get a chance to say this yesterday, but it's amazing the effect that Coast to Coast had, whether you agree with this or not, on the rise of the alternative media. And not from the conspiratorial point of view, but just as an approach topics in a different way, from a different perspective, willing to entertain, or talk about phenomenon that was happening all across the world, from the UFO sightings, which nobody can deny. People see UFOs all the time, whether they're aliens or demons or hidden government operations or whatever they are.
Or a combination thereof.
But it opened up a new avenue, and a whole new audience of millions of people loved the shows for decade and decade and decade. And I really think that opened the door to the alternative media. And I don't think, without Art Bell, I don't know if the alternative media landscape would be the same way that it is today. And
I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. I couldn't agree with you more. Art Bell is the paterfamilias of everything that we do. I did not agree with the man on everything. I think Coast to Coast changed, frankly, not for the better with the departure of Art Bell, with the caveat that I did enjoy John B. Wells in his weekend slot there. But what did Coast to Coast teach us? It's one of the things. I'm like Nikita Khrushchev pounding on my desk with my shoe over here. Critical thinking applied to the open market of free ideas. And I'm not saying that we need to be dispassionate about our ideas, but we need to be tempered and courageous and well educated enough to press pause on that passion long enough to debate, rebut, refute the ridiculousness coming out of the left. Now, the caveat that I'll add to that, Joe, is if the left comes after us guns a-blazing, like those twerps tried to pull on Owen Schroyer a few months back at that park in Austin, then they're going to get what they get. If you come at me with an open hand, I'll greet you with an open hand. If you come at me with a closed fist, I'll shoot you. I'm joking. But the point is, we have enough room in the landscape at this time for discourse. But to go back to what Jack Dorsey was pounding the table with all last week, the people on the left, Joe, they don't want discourse. We're sitting here saying, look, we can engage in the open market of free ideas. We're not real happy with your baby killing, but how do we keep this country together? I'm not trying to use hyperbole or sound like a tough guy when I say this, but with each day that goes by, Joe, I really want to corral all of these reprobates off into California, bust out the biggest Husqvarna chainsaws they make, chop the state off, and watch it float off to Hawaii. And for that matter, you can have Hawaii too.
Yeah, John, here we only have a few moments left of the show. I want to mention this. Sandy Hook parents suing Alex Jones for defamation. This is just the latest in a barrage of lawsuits that himself, Alex Jones, and the people in the alternative media are dealing with. But apparently this alleges that a defamation... the lawsuits filed late Monday. Parents of two children who died in the December 2012 shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, say Jones repeated lies and conspiratorial ravings that have led to death threats. The suits join at least two other recent cases accusing the IW host of defamation. InfoWars host of defamation. So yeah, there you go. The latest in the lawfare battle, and I'll take a deeper look into that. But I want to, in the last moments here, our sponsor, simplycleanfoods.net. They're sponsoring the Occupy 2018 conference coming up this weekend in Canton, Ohio. Go to CoachDaveLive.com. Last minute tickets are available, but I don't know how many are left. And they're our sponsor of this show and also the event this weekend. But GMO-free, Christian-owned, veteran-owned, delicious food, survival, storable. Get your preparations ready. Make sure you have water, and most importantly, after water is 6 months to a year worth of storable food. And you can use the promo code SimplyClean, and I think the year worth of food is the Alt Media Pack. And that is simplycleanfoods.net, promo code SimplyClean. And this is a great company. The food tastes great. Nothing like storable survival food I've tasted in the past. And we want to thank Chance. Also, he has putting together, the Adopt a Vet program that he talked about last week that we will again announce and talk about once everything is set up. So thank
Quickly
you,
on
James,
that,
for that.
Joe, I'm going to be doing an article about the Adopt a Vet program. We've got Occupy 2018 coming up in 3 days, and so there may or may not be a Hagmann Daily Show Friday. Joe and I would like to join you, and we're going to do everything we can to try and make that happen. Of course, we are in transit to Canton, Ohio on Friday, We'll be there Saturday and Sunday with Pastor Paul Bagley, Mike Spalding, L.A. Marzulli, Russ Dizdar, Doug Hagmann, Joe Hagmann. They're even letting me up on the stage, if you can believe that. What is Occupy, Joe? Occupy is an action. Occupy is muzzles down, clipboards in hand, roadblocks.
John, the music's overpowering you, buddy. That'll do it for us today. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.
The Hagmann Daily Show is brought to you by the Hagmann Report. Tune in to the Hagmann Report weekdays, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to HagmannReport.com. That's HagmannReport.com.